blown. And here we are talking about conspiracy theories in our deep dive here for the first episode of the show. If you're watching this on video, make sure to check out the other episodes of this talk. Everything fits together in this discussion in a very holistic way. So if you're listening to the podcast, make use of the chapter headings. If you find yourself here, you can check out all the different parts. Again, talking about conspiracy theories, and I've broken the mainstream narrative up into all of these mnemonic devices beginning with D's or having a D in a significant part of the word, like define, redefine, ID or identify, diagnose, double deal, dictate, which we're on now, and finally disregard. So, talking about dictate, that, my friends, is referring to the more overt way that the elite and the powers that be are controlling the narrative surrounding conspiracy theories. They're engaged again in this hashtag CEP or conspirator enabling propaganda. And with identifying and redefining and diagnosing, these are kind of more psychological, subversive means that they're controlling this discussion, making people feel disgusted to be kind of conspiracy theorists. Now, here it's more overt. So they're engaging in censorship, using conspiracy theories and these associations with violence and extremism that they're trumping up. They're using that to control and enforce their agenda, which is really, it's reeks of totalitarianism, authoritarianism. It reeks of danger for the whole world. Anyone who enjoys freedom, basically. Speech in general is being threatened. Censorship, of course, is right around the corner. Policing. So there's, of course, we've seen throughout this discussion the threat of conspiracy theorists being labeled and fought against as domestic terrorists, right? Of course, we had the Ministry of Truth, the quote-unquote Ministry of Truth. That's another, thing that comes from 1984, Orwell. But the Disinformation Governance Board that was going to be instituted by the DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, that was a big debacle. It ended up getting shut down, and that might have been a bit of a psyop. It's like, oh, they shut that down, so they stopped doing that. No, they continued that work in private, as a lot of people suspected they would. But this is overt kind of government. Government is placing itself in the position of a controller of speech. We're seeing it in the Twitter files right now as this broadcast is live. Those are still being released. Every week we get a new installment of the Twitter files. The FBI engaged in censorship through social media proxies, but censorship nonetheless. So we're seeing it more and more now, this overt kind of censorship. It's becoming normalized. It's this is the narrative in action. So let's take a closer look at some of this. So Caitlin Johnstone makes a great point in this article. In a corporatist system of government, corporate censorship is state censorship. Yes, and basically we are in a corporate. This is a corporatocracy. Okay, money and politics are like this. They're completely intertwined. One of the great movements or solutions that we as a people need to really, really push is getting money out of politics. Nothing really is going to be fixed until that happens. And there was a big push a while back around when oh, I'm going to kick myself for forgetting this. The movement, 99% and one, Occupy Wall Street. That's it. Occupy Wall Street, when that came out, there was a big push to get money out of politics. But yeah, so they're constantly talking about, well, these are private social media companies. Well, not only are we finding that they've been heavily infiltrated by intelligence operatives and political influence, but there's revolving doors. There's, the way that money is flowing. Follow the money. Follow the lobbying efforts of the corporations. All of this is intertwined, and we're going to talk more about how it all coalesces. But also keep in mind that the lawmakers have sat there and threatened the social media platforms in hearings, saying, for instance, they were representatives of Facebook, Twitter, and Google were instructed on the U.S. Senate floor that the responsibility is to, quote, quell information rebellions, end quote. Okay, U.S. Senate floor. So, very troubling, very disturbing. Of course, social media companies like Facebook pairing with the Atlantic Council, which is a hawkish NATO lobby group heavily funded by the U.S. government. Here we read in this article by Mint Press News, great outlet, by the way, check them out. They write in this article that with its leadership comprised of retired military officers, former policymakers, and top figures from the U.S. national security state and Western business elites, the Atlantic Council's role policing the social network should be viewed as a virtual takeover of Facebook by the imperialist state and the Council's extensive list of ultra-wealthy and corporate donors. Okay, and they go on to talk about the sponsors of the Atlantic Council, including war profiteering defense contractors, agencies aligned with Washington and the Pentagon, Gulf Arab tyrants, major transnational corporations, and such well-loved Western philanthropic brands as Carnegie, Koch, Rockefeller, and Soros. Interesting. And there's Hillary with the Atlantic Council there. Okay, so yes, very, very disturbing how the intelligence and Silicon Valley and what is currently our town square is being policed. Speech is being policed more and more out in the open. The mask has really slipped as far as the malavents and the really dark intentions of the oligarchy and the elite from a general perspective, not some overarching conspiracy theory. Let me reiterate, there is no overarching conspiracy theory. That is a straw man that's often pushed in the narrative, like this idea that, the Illuminati or some group is controlling everything. It's not like that. It's basically what it is. It's a confluence of influence with, I think, sociopathy or a lack of empathy being a prime driver of kind of these people who ultimately greed and power is what they crave, and they end up making their way to the top because they're not afraid of stabbing people in the back and stepping on people to get up there. Okay? That's just a natural thing. In fact, let me do an aside to say that one of the things I propose that we need in place before anybody can take power in any kind of representative position, at least on a federal level, those wielding more power, is some sort of psychological test that we need to devise to root out sociopaths. I mean, you have to have human compassion in order to be in power. I think that should be a requirement. Psychologists Get on the test. Let's make this happen, people. Anyway, that aside, the threats of anti-monopoly legislation on Facebook and Google were levied by the government in order to get them in line to quell information rebellions. In other words, censor dissident voices. And this, a lot of this is happening against people on the right, but make no mistake, they have in the past, and they certainly will in the future, use these censorship tactics and these counterintelligence and basically tyranny against people on the left as well. It's proven historically. COINTELPRO, the FBI really, really messed with Martin Luther King Jr., with the suicide note and all that crazy stuff that happened with the Black Panthers and the FBI and the anti-Vietnam War movement. A lot of leftist movements have been infiltrated and attacked by the powers that be. They don't care about really left or right. The main issue is, sociopaths and compassionate or empaths. That's the main divide. It's not right and left. It's more class and that sociopathy, empathy kind of divide. At least that's the way I see it in the world. That's kind of, I think that gets to the heart of the issue. The conspirators versus the conspiracy theorists, if you will, but they are the conspirators that are spinning this conspirator-enabling propaganda. And this goes beyond propaganda. This is actual, they're dictating what can and can't be said. Okay. So here in Newsweek, Twitter executive revealed to be PSYOP soldier linked to spreading disinformation across social media, a threat to our democracy. Yeah, so he was part of the 77th Brigade out of Great Britain, and he was, of course, part of Twitter, and then Twitter... eventually, this was an older article, they would eventually go on to hire Baker from the FBI, very implicated in the Russiagate scandal, conspiracy theory. Well, Baker was actually vetting the Twitter files. He's former FBI guy, basically a political operative, and he was inside Twitter as well. And Elon Musk ended up firing him recently after finding out that he was responsible for releasing the files that would implicate the FBI. What was he able to hold back? If this is what we're seeing now, imagine what we could have been seeing, right? So Caitlin Johnstone writes, so much of what the CIA used to do covertly, it now does overtly. Operation Mockingbird was what the CIA was engaged in. Basically it went out in the open. Now they're pundits. They'll come on all the news networks, MSNBC, CNN, all the mainstream networks. They'll write for all of the major newspapers, all of the influential ones, and talk about how, whatever the imperialist agenda happens to be, they'll push the points, that are making people money and moving on the hegemonic agenda of the U.S. empire. So the revolving door, also keep that in mind. It's a huge issue. Basically, as soon as you leave a government position, you get hired in a corporate lobbyist position or a high corporate position. Vice versa, you leave those positions from industry to go work in government regulation. We've got all kinds of chicanery going on here. So, again, going back to this article, Carl Bernstein published the article about the CIA and the media. He really blew the whistle on a lot of the CIA involvement in the media from back in the day, and it never stopped. And rest assured, if what we're seeing on the surface, with what we're seeing on the surface, there's probably so much more going on underneath. The Twitter files alludes to that there's so much going on underneath. What we see is the tip of the iceberg, and it's beyond bad enough, threatening our right to free speech. But yeah, now they do it out in the open, and even going so far as to create the Ministry of Truth. That was a very eye-opening ordeal, despite the fact that it was scrapped. Here from The Intercept, this was a bombshell article talking about the Homeland Security's direct line with Facebook. So let me read a bit from this article. Ken Klippenstein and Li Feng reporting the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, is quietly broadening efforts to curb speech it considers dangerous. An investigation by The Intercept has found years of internal DHS memos, emails, documents obtained via leaks and ongoing lawsuit, as well as published documents, illustrate an expansive effort by the agency to influence tech platforms to dictate what can and can't be said in violation of the First Amendment. So here, key takeaways. Yeah, they shuttered the Disinformation Governance Board, a.k.a. the Ministry of Truth, with Scary Poppins, but this document reveals that the underlying work is ongoing. So the whole Disinformation Governance Board may have been intended to make people believe that this work was shuttered, and we know it's not. So, they created here it says they created a special portal for the government partners to report disinformation, quote unquote, directly, what they deem as disinformation, right? The Twitter files, very revealing. Basically, now we're getting a church committee, sort of a church committee type thing to investigate this. Whether you're on the left or right, censorship is censorship, and it's very dangerous for everybody unless you're part of this oligarchy that is wanting to censor speech, to censor conspiracy theories in the name of enabling conspirators, enabling conspiracies. This was a conspiracy to infiltrate social media in order to censor speech. And another way, we're going back more to the subversive aspect. So we're going to dial it back a little bit here to talk about how they manipulate headlines to kind of pit people against each other as a way of more subversively dictating, having people police themselves. So what we've seen, and it's ongoing. This is an ongoing story talking about all of the direct government censorship and kind of implied but threatening direct government censorship involved with big tech, censoring speech, censoring conspiracy theories and anything they dub conspiracy theories, or anybody they dub to be dissident or speaking an opinion that does not mesh with the agenda of, the power and greed of the elite. It's inconvenient. Whatever is inconvenient for power is what they often dub a conspiracy theory, even if it doesn't technically fit the definition of a conspiracy theory itself. They throw that term around like crazy. So, in this aspect of it, I want to talk here about this study by David Rosado, where he analyzed media headlines over a number of years and found that they are trending more negative. He did a study and wrote an article about it, the increasing negativity and emotionality of news media headlines. And here's his analysis. So here you see in the top graph, basically that's analyzing the overall sentiment of news media article headlines. And let me zoom in on my screen here. So yeah, it goes from 2000 at the left end of the graph to 2019, span of 19 years. You see that the trend is very clearly markedly downward. And he breaks it up in the second graph between left, centrist, and right-leaning news outlets. And you see that overall, the trend is down. Interestingly, the centrist ones kind of leveled out there for a number of years and trend higher than the others. But here's other examples. Anger, disgust, fear, all trending upward. Joy had a spike, but it's trending downward in the last 5 years or so. Sadness has been trending up. Neutral terminology trending down. He breaks it up between left, centrist, and right. And then terms denoting right and left political extremism have been exploding in the last few years in right and left outlets. So terms like far left, far right, radical right, extreme left, extremism, extremists, ultra-conservatism, et cetera, all of these terms are exploding in the media. So this is divisiveness at play. Divisiveness is one of the agendas of the media in general that I identified in a report I did on the media back in 2010. And dumbing down, and I use the D mnemonic device again there, but divisiveness is part and parcel to the narrative and the agenda of the mainstream media. Divide and conquer is basically the philosophy behind it. That's the drive behind it. Divide and conquer, getting people to fight against each other in order to, have, your neighbor help silence the narrative that you want silenced. You connect conspiracy theories to right-wing ideology, automatically, the left-leaning people get propagandized into fighting conspiracy theories, thinking they're fighting another ideology that they're trained to be, diametrically opposed to. It's not really like that. This is the false ideological division, the right-left division. It's really, it is and it isn't. It's a little more meaningless than other ideological divisions, but I'm not going to get into that too much here. But this aspect of dictating the narrative of conspiracy theories, again, has to do with divisiveness, pitting people against each other, and thus helping to silence conspiracy theories. Now here, we've got Parler, right? The social media platform billing itself as a free speech platform, when everybody was saying, oh, if you don't like the censorship, what people claimed was a private company making decisions on its own, which wasn't happening, first of all. Second of all, they would say, if you don't like this, Facebook censoring your speech, go to another social media platform. Well, people created a First Amendment-based platform called Parler, and you might know the end of the story. It was crushed by these huge companies, Amazon, Google, and Apple, essentially crushed Parler, and it was influenced by the U.S. government as well. I think AOC was instrumental in saying, you guys have to do something about this. Amazon, you've got the servers. So Amazon had the servers that Parler was using, and of course Google and Apple have a monopoly on the app stores, right? They have a duopoly. They have a duopoly on the app stores. So Apple, by the way, I just recalled they were on the $1 million plus founding or sponsor list of the News Literacy Project, which defines a conspiracy theory as ipso facto unfounded. In other words, before you even do any research, investigation, before you even consider the evidence, a conspiracy theory is ipso facto unfounded. And that's the one where the lady's saying, oh, there's no evidence. No evidence. Completely illogical, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, Apple. Okay. Google created that jigsaw where we saw that propaganda was thick. And we're not going to analyze any particular article in this, as you've figured it out at this point in the discussion. We're not really analyzing any particular article fully. We're just looking at this grander narrative. But in the future, for Mind Blown, I'd like to maybe every few episodes pick an article from the mainstream media that came out with this narrative about conspiracy theories and, break it down, really destroy the shit out of it, because this propaganda is it's really dumb. A lot of the propaganda that they are engaged in. So let's take a look now here at again in this topic of dictating here. I want to look at the force that dictates. The force that dictates. And there is a central leverage here of power that I've identified that has to do with Vanguard and BlackRock. Together, those financial institutions control $20 trillion between them. This article from Financial Post says they can own almost everything by 2028. The thing about BlackRock and Vanguard, and this is something that you can engage in yourself, is pick a company like Google or Apple, okay, publicly traded company. You go over to Yahoo Finance and you look them up, and you click on holders, and you can see institutional holders of companies. Now, here is State Street, for instance, and you see that the number one holder is Vanguard. Number two is BlackRock. And they're another investment company. So if you said that, okay, who owns Apple? Well, Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street. But keep in mind that Vanguard and BlackRock own a chunk of State Street. So whatever they show on the chart that they own, actually they own a lot more. All of these entities that you see on the list, even BlackRock itself is owned by Vanguard and vice versa. Well, we don't know about Vanguard as a private equity, private firm, but BlackRock is owned a big chunk by Vanguard. So any corporate conglomerate that you look up, any weapons manufacturer, pharmaceutical company, you're going to see these names, BlackRock and Vanguard, over and over again. All these big financial firms, here they are again. And you don't realize it, but there's a hidden concentration. We do see it, but we don't see the extent of it on paper, because, hidden behind the idea of the separate entity of BlackRock is Vanguard. Hidden behind this idea of a separate entity of Morgan Stanley is, again, Vanguard, BlackRock, State Street. All of this wealth is getting grossly concentrated. It's a huge issue of disregard in our media, in the overall narrative, how much power and wealth is concentrated. It's not a conspiracy. It's a confluence of influence. It is a combination of, the vast conglomeration that we've seen, especially in the media, going from, hundreds of different outlets to 5 different mega corporations that own over 90% of all media. That kind of control, and then that control being leveraged from these groups. Who's behind Vanguard? Probably, a small group of families. There's certain families that we know are absolute, just off the charts rich. The Rothschilds, for instance. So there is a kind of nexus. There's a point of leverage that we can identify that shows you that goes hand in glove with the idea of how consistent the narrative is. The consistency in the narrative, like in this case, conspiracy theory equals bad, goes hand in glove with this idea of leveraged power, of this consistency of where the most wealth is, the most power is. It's basically pretty singular. It's hidden. The leverage is hidden again behind all the fact that, I own a piece of you, but you own a piece of me, but wealth, in the end, wealth, it all just trickles together. All the wealth, all the power, all the status quo, the way that things work or the way that things are dysfunctional in the medical establishment, in the pharmaceutical industry, in the military-industrial complex, kind of dictating when the next war is going to be. That kind of conflict of interest, just creating exploitation and just a horrible, horrible world. That this is how it's happening. This is the mechanism of it. A confluence of interest, a confluence of greed and power that is being basically, hidden in the open in a way. The way that this is orchestrated, of course, is, in secret in groups like the Bilderberg Group, the CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations, their closed-door meetings involving, military industrialists and media executives and personalities and government, the Trilateral Commission, even the Sun Valley conferences where media members from all different stripes, Fox News to MSNBC, rub elbows and talk amongst themselves away from the prying eyes of the public. So, yeah, this is the force that dictates this, and it's a historic wealth concentration that we're dealing with now. It's a huge issue that we're dealing with now, and we're seeing it, we're seeing this kind of totalitarian regime take shape before our eyes. We've got the concentration of wealth, the concentration of power, the concentration of narrative. The narrative just goes along with everything else that we're seeing, and we need to be vigilant now more than ever. We need to be conspiracy theorists. We're all conspiracy theorists, but anyway, the elite culture, I want to talk about that. It's kind of sick. There is a hedonistic, sadistic, sociopathic kind of conspirator, villainous, stereotypically villainous kind of persona that we can identify in the elite. If you just slightly close your eyes, just blur your vision a little bit, and there it is. If you try to focus on, too many details, you get bogged down. Just blur your eyes a little bit, look at the big picture. There it is. There's definitely, and I'm not one to dualize, saying, good against evil, and create that kind of, that dualism. It's beyond that. There's more to it than that. But I do want to say that we should focus our attention on, really having clarity about the motivations of people and the power of people. What are they doing? Follow the money. You're going to understand things a whole lot better. Use that Yahoo Finance. If you're wondering about, a certain outlet, a certain media outlet, look them up on Yahoo Finance, and you'll see that that everything kind of flows into, a very narrow channel. So that's a way that, things can be controlled. It's, and it's also a very simple how things can be controlled. The people at the top hire people below them who have the same kind of worldview. What are you going to do to make me profit? Profit, 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 power, 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 and such and so forth. It goes down the line. There's also compartmentalization, where a vast secrecy can be maintained. There's many means and methods by which basically this non-conspiracy of a singular narrative can be furthered. So let's leave it at that for this topic. We're going to move on next to disregard, the final topic before we wrap up this discussion. Thank you again for being here. It's a pleasure. It's a bit nerve-wracking, I admit, being my first show, but I'm having a lot of fun. I hope you're having fun too. Be sure to check out the other episodes. Be sure to check out Disregarding. If you're watching the video, it's probably going to be split out. And all right, here we go.